Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. 2 hours of Ask Me Anything today with Joe Heschmeyer. All you got to do is pick up the phone and call 888-318-7884. Anybody can call, whether you're a believer or not a believer. If you want to know about Jesus, you want to know about the church, you want to know about the Bible, the sacraments, the moral teachings, 888-318-7884 is the number. Joe Heschmeyer, apologist here at Catholic Answers, author of a whole bunch of wonderful books, including this book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, The Catholic Witness of the Fathers in Christianity's First 2 Centuries. Joe Heschmeyer, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Did you notice how I said hello?
Did you say hello?
I said hello. Yeah, I didn't pronounce the H.
For those listening at home, which is probably an important demographic to reach if we're going to explain this joke.
No, almost nobody's listening at home. Almost everybody's listening in the car.
That's
Almost everybody.
fair.
Almost everybody.
A lot of people are on the computer these days. And
Oh, yeah,
hopefully,
that's true.
Hopefully they're at home and not watching YouTube in their car.
Well, that's true.
But yeah, before the show, Cy and I realized we both were big fans growing up of the song Henry VIII by Herman's Hermits. And we think it's very funny that there are so many H's in that song and the singer does not pronounce one of them.
He doesn't know how to pronounce a H. He just says Henry VIII.
Yeah, he adds an extra syllable to Henry.
Henry. Yeah, that's right.
He
Henry.
drops the letter and adds a syllable. It's pretty great.
Herman's Hermits, Henry VIII. I thought when I was a child this was a genius song. I was absolutely blown away with how good I think about it now, and I'm like, I was like in first grade thinking, how does not everybody recognize the pure genius of this song? And I was telling Joe that, and he said he had a similar feeling about the same song as a child.
Almost the exact same thing. Of
Really?
just thinking like this song is so clever because I knew who Henry VIII was,
Yeah.
and I knew that I don't actually know even why I knew all of this, that he'd had a bunch of wives or something.
Yeah.
And then to see it kind of turned on its head, where he's Henry VIII because he's the 8th guy she's married named Henry, is a very funny kind of concept for a song.
Plus, it's a cool little tune.
To a kid.
But to a kid, it's like, who thought of this? This is genius. He got married to the widow next door, and she'd been married 7 times before.
Actually, I'm worried about him. The film adaptation is going to be pretty dark as well. I'm gonna say.
I know, because how did she really? Some suspicions had to be raised after the 4th or 5th.
I mean, how
husband
close
died.
is it to the life of Henry VIII?
Well, actually, it's like a reverse. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. The other thing, when we studied genetics as children, and we found out that the Y chromosome comes from the male, and I thought, if Henry VIII had only known this, the first thing I thought was, Henry VIII is an idiot. They couldn't make boy children. He's the one that had to make the boy child. It was his problem.
Right.
Yeah. That's my whole take on
really,
genetics.
at a certain point, you should probably figure out what is the common denominator here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
Fathering children with all these different women, and I never have a son.
Yeah.
Although he did have one out of wedlock. I think the child died.
I think he should have just adopted. I don't understand why, Augustus was adopted by Julius Caesar. It had been done before. Why?
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Paul is in. It's Ask Me Anything. You can ask whatever you like.
Including questions about English dynasties from the 16th century.
Or pop groups from the 1960s, including Herman's Hermits. Paul in Oregon, you're going to start us off today watching on YouTube. Thanks for the call, Paul. Go ahead with your question for Joe. No, Paul? Oh, right from the get-go, we start with somebody who's got their phone on mute. I don't know. I'm blaming you, Paul. Maybe it's not you, but I'm going to come back to you. Don't go anywhere. We'll come back. In the meantime, we'll go to Milan in Florida, listening on the Catholic Answers Live at Milan. Welcome. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Oh, thank you. So I was asking, since Adam and Eve did not enjoy the beatific vision while in Eden, but now after the fall that the saints in heaven do get to enjoy it, does that mean that it was better for us to fall because now we get the opportunity to enjoy the beatific vision?
So this is a hotly debated point in one sense, because the question is, what would have happened to Adam and Eve had they not fallen? And the short answer to that is we don't know. We've not been given the answer to that question. But we can say this, because one view, more associated with St. Bonaventure and the Franciscans, is that Christ would have come into the world anyway, and he would have given us some means of being glorified. St. Thomas Aquinas and the kind of classically Dominican view is Christ comes in the world as a remedy for sin. Inasmuch as the church has spoken on it, I would look to paragraph 412 of the Catechism, and it's asking a slightly different question. It's asking, why did God not stop Adam and Eve from sinning in the first place? And they answer quite clearly in the Catechism, because something better was going to be brought about through the redemption. That as a theological doctrine, we could even say, God only ever permits evil to draw a greater good from it. He doesn't permit evil for evil's own sake, but because of some good in view. He never wills evil, but he will permit it when he can draw good from it. So in paragraph 412, St. Leo says, Christ's inexpressible grace gave us blessings better than those the demon's envy had taken away. And then Aquinas said, there's nothing to prevent human nature's being raised up to something greater even after sin. God permits evil in order to draw forth some greater good. And then he quotes St. Paul, that where sin increased, grace abounded all the more, from Romans. And then the Exultet from the Easter Vigil, though what the deacon or sometimes the priest will proclaim at the very beginning of the Easter Vigil, which says, "O happy fault, felix culpa, which gained for us so great a Redeemer." So we want to be really clear here that we're not saying sin is actually good. You know, when we say, "Oh happy fault, oh necessary sin of Adam," we're not literally saying we're really glad for sin. We're not. What we are glad for is that we have a God who loves us enough that even when we err, even when we go astray, he can turn even those moments to his glory and to our good.
Milan, makes sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for getting us started today. The number is 888-318-7884. All right. We're going to go back to Oregon now. And Paul is in Oregon watching on YouTube. Sorry for whatever the mix-up was, Paul, but we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hey, Joe. I had a question about the history and the current state of anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church. I'm currently Jewish, but I'm actually looking to discerning Catholicism, but I do have some reservations, honestly, around the whole anti-Semitic thing, because I do see people in current day defending things like the Inquisition, and that just makes me a little bit iffy. So I was wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a hard question to give a nuanced answer to when we're talking about the history, because there have been some ugly moments in the history. There really have been. And I think it's worth addressing that kind of forthrightly. Strangely, a lot of those ugly moments are probably born out of the fact that we have a sense of brotherhood. I think it was Sigmund Freud who talked about the tyranny of small differences. That if you look at like the history of the world, the people who tend to most hate each other are the ones who are very similar on like 90 to 95% of things, and then don't quite agree. And so Catholics and Protestants can treat each other very badly sometimes for this reason. You go to the Balkans and it's, you know, people hating on their next door neighbor, not the person 5,000 miles away. And so the fact that we have so much in common and yet don't see eye to eye on this incredibly important question of whether Jesus is the Messiah or not led to a lot of acrimony and bad blood, because both sides would look at this and say, you're just in bad faith, not seeing things the way I do, which is, of course, not fair and not a good way of understanding, for one, the gift of faith, for two, the complicated history of both Jewish and Christian history. So in the early days, so you'll find things in the New Testament, back when Judaism is very much kind of the dominant strand and Christianity is the small minority, where it'll speak of the Jews. Now, the word there is, in many cases, more accurately translated the Judeans, because that's what's in view, and it's not meant to be an undifferentiated whole. But later, Gentile Christians would sometimes seize upon those biblical texts, or sometimes even not even needing that much of a pretext, and would say and do hateful and awful things. So there is certainly a history of anti-Semitism that has colored some of the relations, or in a history of anti-Judaism, maybe more accurately, because it's not race-based for the most part. It's based on religious differences. And it's something that I think St. John Paul II quite wisely apologized for, and something that we've seen, especially in the 20th century, popes taking a very sharp eye towards. This goes back even Pope Pius XI and Mittenbrinder Zorge, or Pope Paul VI, with the liturgical changes to make sure that the reference to perfidious Jews was scrubbed because it sounded like it was just making an undifferentiated claim about Jewish people. So there's been a grappling on the church's part of trying to remove things that can be weaponized for kind of hateful and bigoted reasons. So as for how things stand today, when I was growing up, I don't think I had ever met someone who was openly anti-Jewish. Like, it was something obviously we knew about from history, something that, we'd studied. And, occasionally you'd hear people make some kind of playful jokes, but usually to their friends in a high school boy kind of way. And with the internet now, you will find people who are really ugly with anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and I mean, you name it. You're going to find people who espouse every form of hatefulness, including Catholics. But I would say that is much more a phenomenon of people who are spending a lot of time online, and not the kind of thing that, at least in my experience, I've seen in church. I know, Trent Horn, my fellow apologist here, is ethnically Jewish, like 50% Jewish, and he's seen some ugly comments online. But I think, I don't want to speak for him, but I think, like me, it's been something where he's seen it more online than in real life or like in person. And so some of that is something we have to grapple with as Catholics. Some of that is just something that is probably a phenomenon of spending too much time behind a screen and venting some ugly bile.
Paul, I'd love to hear your response. This is a really very important issue right now at this moment in the life of the church. So what do you think of what Joe said, or do you have a follow-up? Or
No, that was great. That was really, honestly reassuring, because I just wanted to know that anti-Semitism wasn't the default state in the Catholic Church. It doesn't sound like it is. So.
No, I think
Be careful
it
who
was
you read,
shocking
though.
when I saw some of the things that people had sent to Trent. And it's shocking. I mean, it is as shocking, I think, to an ordinary Catholic as it would be to anybody. It isn't like, behind closed doors, we're all saying weird things about Jewish people. One of my friends from my scout troop growing up, his mom was Catholic, his dad was Jewish, and his dad would go with them to Mass. I don't think he was super observant. And I don't think to my knowledge, there was no kind of incident. I never heard anybody say anything negative. So those kind of things, maybe they exist and I just didn't see them, but I don't have any experience of it as a person who is not Jewish, but is sometimes mistaken for being Jewish.
Paul, Joe, do you mind if I just jump in on this conversation
Please.
just a little bit? Because I've been really working on this and just mentally chewing over this, because I've had go to some talks, and then after the talk, people ask you questions, and some of the questions have been like, for example, about international Jewry or something, or the Jewish, and you go, wait, what? We're talking about what? And where is this coming from? And I think that there is a phenomenon going on in the Catholic Church today where a lot of people want to be kind of showing their bona fides as a Catholic by being all in on big T traditions and liturgical traditionalism and all that. And there is this little t tradition of anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism in the Catholic Church. And I think sometimes people are grabbing onto that as almost an identifier of I'm going to almost a kind of revival of the good old-fashioned anti-Judaism of if you're not anti-Jewish, you're somehow not sufficiently a traditional Catholic. I think it's sick. I think it's devastating and evil. But I think that's part of the thinking. I think some people think if you really want to, really hew to the traditions of the church, you got to be anti-Jewish.
I think to piggyback on your piggybacking, I would say there is a tendency among certain demographics, so I'm thinking especially here, like men in their 20s. That's not exclusive, but this is
actually everybody
kind of
who's asked me a question about international Jewry has been a man in his 20s. Every single one.
I don't think it's particularly striking. It's the same groups that are going to, with a different upbringing, they're going to become Marxists. But the point is, these are people who are wanting to be really radical for something because they want to have a set of principles and they want to be distinct. And those are actually not bad impulses, but they can go awry so easily. And so that just needs to be redirected. Like, be radical, but be a radical saint. Not like, so the overlap between people asking weird questions about the Jews and people whose political ideology doesn't even fit on a spectrum because it's so weird is, I mean, it's almost a circle, that Venn diagram. So,
Paul, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Can I add one more thing? Simone Riscala at Philos Catholic has some good stuff. She might be a good person to ask as well.
Paul, I want to come back to you again because this has been really on my mind lately. I'm always happy to have the opportunity to talk about the problem of anti-Semitism in some areas of the Catholic Church today. You got any last words for us, or no? Dude, is Paul still there? I don't know. Well, we got a connection problem. Some kind of connection problem. All right. Well, thank you very much for the call. We got to take a very quick break. I let it go a little too long. Right back with more Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
Listen to EWTN, listen to the Catholic stations, but turn away that mainstream media, that mainstream news. It's all nonsense.
I come from a family of 16. I was really encouraged when I was listening to your radio station, and I just think everything you were saying was absolutely true, and that there's still hope out there.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. And thank you. Darren is the only person who I'm just going to do the show for Darren. He's the only one who appreciates me. Yeah.
I think if we took a poll of the audience, I think they would agree with that.
I think so. Yeah. They're probably like, Darren, stop appreciating him. He'll stop doing all the. All right. I am your Appy host. And now we go to JP in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. JP, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Joe Heschmeyer.
Okay, so this has been kind of bugging me for about a week because I was browsing YouTube and I saw this ex-Catholic bring it up. This is like one of his bugaboos. It's one of his reasons for falling away. I didn't really have a good response to it in myself, so here it goes. So the claim is that the church has certain charisms of infallibility, that the Holy Spirit will lead us into all truth. Yet, for one example, we know from the historical critical analysis of the Gospel of John and the manuscripts and all that stuff that the story of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery is a later addition. It doesn't appear in the original, or as close as we can get to the original text. Yet the Council of Trent has, ostensibly, definitively, and infallibly determined that, since that's the text that was received into the Bible by the church, that's the true scripture. So we have a conflict between, two bits of certain knowledge, and one of them is obviously, the infallibility of the church. It's all made up hoo-ha. So I was wondering, I'm just, stream of consciousness repeating the question.
No, that's okay. Can I ask a question though? What's the problem there? So let's assume for a minute, because there is, as you say, there is a broad scholarly consensus, although there are people who dispute that the passage with the woman caught in adultery is a later addition, that it was probably a freestanding text that at some point is put into the Gospel of John so that it doesn't perish. what does that prove about infallibility or inerrancy? I mean, I guess it's the argument that it can only be infallible if John himself wrote it.
Well, I think that was his reading of the council anathemas, was that because the council defined the scriptures to be true, the key word was true, not unqualified true, not just true in matters of faith and morals, but
no. I mean, I think it's true. I think that story happened. I don't think the question of authorship is why it's true, though. Like, the human author isn't the one bestowing infallibility or inerrancy upon the scriptures. So whether John personally wrote that portion or not, nothing particularly seems to hang on that. I'll give you an example. The early Christians were openly unsure of who wrote the epistle to the Hebrews. There were a lot of people who said Paul. There were a lot of people who said other people instead. We can affirm the inspiration of the epistle to the Hebrews without settling the authorship question. Because from the perspective of a Christian, what matters is that God wrote it. Less important by a lot is who the human authors were who worked in that kind of instrumental sort of way.
Does that make sense to you, JP?
I mean, it satisfies me, and it's a good place. It's sort of what I needed as a good place to continue the conversation.
So yeah, I would just ask, like, why, so take, for instance, we talk about the Torah as the books of Moses. Deuteronomy 34 describes the death of Moses. Nobody thinks Moses wrote that part.
Mm-hmm.
And yet none of that disqualify. That's not some new finding historical critical scholars, came up with. That's anybody who can read is like, well, obviously Moses is not the one narrating his own death.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's true that there may be interesting angles for textual transmission in history that critical scholars can come up with, although I would put heavy caveats on a lot of the state of the research right now. I think a lot of things that are just taken for granted now, 50 years from now, won't be viewed as very reliable. And one reason I'd give is if you read any historical critical stuff from 50 years ago or any of the higher criticism from 50 years ago, it hasn't stood the test of time well. So this is a very young kind of academic field that is still trying to get its feet under it. And it has major challenges from other kind of scholarly circles. So like literary criticism and other forms of critical analysis that reject some of the premises of higher criticism. All that's to say, I'm just kind of assuming for the sake of argument that everything about the textual transmission of the woman caught in adultery is true. I wouldn't let my faith hang on the latest scholarly consensus on a particular doctrine, because I think that's of much less epistemic certainty.
All right, JP?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, like I said, it's a good way to think about it, and it's a good way to continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, please feel free to call back. If this continues to gnaw at you, I'd be happy to keep the conversation going, or if you've got another kind of aspect you want to approach it from.
The number here is 888-318-7884. Sally in San Francisco is next, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Welcome, Sally. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hi. My question is easy. You guys should know, though, that I'm non-Catholic.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll probably make our answer longer then, just to spend more time with you. Try to get you in.
Was Jesus joyous?
Extremely joyous. Joy doesn't mean the same as just happiness, but there is I was actually listening to somebody talk about this recently. Like, there's a kind of circumstantial happiness. Somebody wins the lottery, and of course they're going to be happy. But a circumstantial happiness can be knocked over with a feather. Then you finally have to pay taxes on your lottery winnings, and your smile turns into a frown. Those kind of things. So if your happiness is rooted on the ephemeral, then it doesn't take much to upset it. But Jesus is able to be joyful and loving and kind and selfless, even in the midst of tremendous torture and suffering.
And he speaks about his own joy. He uses the word joy to refer to himself, that his joy would be in us.
He does?
Yeah, and also, like, this is one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. So for instance, in Galatians 5, when St. Paul's talking about the fruit of the Spirit. Joy is the second one that he mentions after love. So I don't. Does this help? Is there a particular? I guess it helps to know a little more about like what's behind the question. What's causing you to question that?
Changing pastors at my church.
All right. Okay. Tell you what, Sally, would you mind holding on through the break? Because we have to take this break, and we still want to try to make you Catholic. So we'll do that on the other side of the break. Sally from San Francisco on the line. You can get on the line, ask Joe your question, 888-318-7884. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
From its earliest days, Catholic faith has been lived by a yearly cycle of feasts and seasons. The new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, Feasts of Our Fathers, is a one-stop companion for praying and meditating through the holy days and seasons of the Church with help from the most ancient Christian people. Don't just read about the early saints, pray with them. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers now at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer, our guest today. Joe's got a book. One of his books is called The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. I focus on that one particularly at the moment because it's on sale for $10 a copy over at shop.catholic.com and free delivery anywhere in the United States. We just give the copies to Edgar. He drives around the United States and delivers them for free. So if you would... Did you not know that, Edgar, that's how we're doing this? Go to shop.catholic.com, get your copy, get another copy, hand it out to somebody. The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, $10, free delivery in the United States. Right now in San Francisco, on the line with us is Sally. Change of pastor in her church has given her a question about whether or not Jesus was joyful. And did I get that right, Sally?
Yes, you did.
And Joe, you were in the midst of addressing that.
Yeah, so he is full of joy, and his message is meant to give us joy. But I was curious a little bit more about, if I can ask, what was the situation with the change of the pastors that had you wondering about Jesus and joy? Was it something you heard or experienced?
The church has a new pastor, and the pastor is a lot more conservative than I am. Conservative theologically than I am, and it seems to me like all the joy has gone out.
Oh.
And that's why I'm asking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Jesus talks about the relationship between love, his commandments, and joy in John 15. And I think it's something we could all do well to meditate on, because I think it is often the case that as Christians we want to choose one of the two. We want the experience of joy, or we want the keeping of the law and the order and the commandments, and we just pick one, and that is not what we're called to do as Christians. So in John 15, at the Last Supper, Jesus says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. Just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full." So Jesus, absolutely, he's full of joy. And he gives us in John 15 a roadmap to joy. Like he shows us how we can be joyful like he is joyful.
There are a lot of grumpy Christians, though, Sally. That's an affliction. That's an affliction we have. I don't know why, but there are. I'll tell you what. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sally.
This pastor is not grumpy, but his theology is not anything that I've ever had much exposure to, and I'm having a rough time with it.
You know where you can find if you're looking for somewhere.
Oh no, here he goes. Told you we were going to try to make you Catholic, Sally.
Well, in San Francisco, I know you. There's
Oh,
a very
there's
good
a
bishop
wonderful
there
bishop
by
there,
the
yeah.
name of Bishop Corleone. Heart of a Lion, I believe, is what his name means. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's a good sign.
Well, I'll tell you what, Sally. I hope you'll call many times and give us the opportunity to bring you into the Catholic Church. But whatever happens, I'm confident Joe has given the correct answer. Jesus is just overflowing with joy. That's the purpose of Jesus' life, is to bring joy to the world. Oh, hey, that's a song. I forgot that's a song. But I would like to give you a little book that we have called The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It. I think it's about the Christian life of joy, and you don't have to take it, but you're welcome to it. It looks like Joe wants to say something else before I let you go, though.
Well, I was just going to say, the other thing Jesus says at the Last Supper about this is he promises the disciples that their sorrow will turn into joy. And he compares it to the experience of childbirth. That, childbirth is about the roughest experience I think most women who've given birth have ever gone through. But it is so closely tied to this experience of joy that many people who will say, this was the hardest thing I've ever done, will also be totally willing to have another child, which is a shocking kind of thing, It'd be like saying, this war was really traumatizing, but I'm happy to go enlist again and go to another one. That this connection between sorrow and joy in the Christian life is something really mysterious. And there's a beautiful theology of suffering there, and a beautiful theology of how God will take those hardships and turn them into our joy. There's much more that could be said about that, but I wanted to kind of throw that out there, that even if you're going through a rough patch right now, even if you're going through conflict with the pastor or a sense of not belonging or whatever it may be in your life and in the life of all those listening, God can turn those moments of sorrow into opportunities for joy if we'll allow him to transform them.
Sally, if you would like, just hang on, give Edgar an address, and we will get it up to San Francisco, Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness, and Where to Find It. And please do call again. You're good company, and it would be very nice to get to talk with you another time. However, I will move on now because every single line is full. On we go to Sydney, Australia. Gary in Sydney, Australia, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app down under. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning.
Breakfast already or not yet?
No, I had a bacon and egg roll. Yeah, that's done.
The old bacon and egg roll.
Did you say a bacon and egg roll?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
I'm
It's
on the
Australia.
next plane.
Yeah.
I'm there.
No,
That sounds delicious.
No meat pies for you this morning, Gary?
Cracker. Sorry, what was that?
No meat pies for you this morning?
No meat pies. Maybe for lunch. We'll see what happens.
Maybe for lunch,
I
okay.
like the transition from all the lines are full to let's have a lengthy conversation about breakfast.
About
It's just
Australian
classic
breakfast.
Tom. Yeah,
We're talking
fair.
Australian breakfast.
Yeah, that's it.
All right.
But he might have a question. he wants
Oh, there we go. Nicely done.
Oh, mate, you got. Oh, that's good. That's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Gary, go ahead with a question. With all of our sincere apologies for what just happened, go ahead with your question for Joe.
No, that's all right. Look, I was having a lengthy discussion with a Muslim about the Trinity, and the entire conversation funneled down to a single question, and I want to see if we can address that question. And the question is this: is it possible, whether theologically, metaphysically, logically, however, is it possible that there could be a fourth person of God? So an unrevealed fourth person of God. Now, I know that's not the teaching, and that's not what's been revealed, but that was the question that was really pushed against me, and I'm not really sure how to respond to that, whether it's possible.
That's a very good question. The Fourth Lateran Council specifically rejects the idea of there being a fourth person of the Trinity. But we could say this. Logically, we only know the nature of the Trinity because God has revealed himself to us. And we know he's triune and not quadriune because he reveals himself as triune, and God does not lie, and he's not trying to trick us. And so could we, without God's revelation, have known whether God was one person or three or four? There's some indications that God is more than one because God is love, and that he's not just love once he creates the universe, that he always, for all existence, is this eternal outpouring of love. And that suggests some kind of experience in God of both lover and beloved. But we couldn't, from that alone, deduce that there's exactly three persons in the Godhead, as opposed to four, or I think you would even say two or five. So we wouldn't be able to know that from reason alone, but from revelation, we know there are three and exactly three persons in the Godhead. And with the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215, we can reject any attempt to add a fourth one, even unwittingly. And in that case, the fourth person being added was the divine essence. So you had the Father, Son, and Spirit, and then the essence of God as something distinct from Father, Son, and Spirit, where it kind of accidentally being turned into a fourth one. So, but even that, we would say, nope, three persons, one God. That's how God has revealed it to us, and we know there's no more, no fewer.
Okay, Gary?
Yeah, done. No, thanks. Yeah, 100%. No, thanks for that. Really appreciate it, Joe.
All right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Go enjoy your Tim Tams.
I got a yeah, no,
All right,
yeah.
done.
I think that's a yes.
I think it's a bit early for that, but yeah. Thanks, guys.
I just love talking about Australian food. I don't know why. I just love talking about Australian food. Nathan's in Virginia. They got good food in Virginia as well. Watching on YouTube. Nathan, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Yeah, speaking of food, I'm actually at work right now. I actually own a pizza restaurant. So there you
nice.
Go.
I thought you were going to say, speaking of food, I'm actually at work
Australia
right now, even though it's dinner time.
Yeah.
But
Well, what town are you in Virginia?
Withville.
And you want to say the name of the pizza restaurant, and everyone in America will come there right now?
It's called CJ's Pizza.
Well, everybody get on over to CJ's Pizza. 2-for-1 special right now. I just did that. Sorry, Nathan. I apologize for that.
He owns it. He can do it.
Oh, crap. You're going to put me to work.
All right. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Okay, so I was talking to a family member of mine, and so we're both Protestants, but I'm heavily, I'm really considering the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. He brought up in Protestant circles, you will hear this same phrase thrown out all the time. I have read the Bible an X amount of times, and I have gotten a different, meaning or whatever every single time. And so I brought that up to a family member after we're kind of throwing theology at each other, and he said that he believes the Bible is a living. So number one, it's the ultimate authority, the highest authority, and then he believes the reason people say that is because when you read the Bible, it is a living book. Obviously, it's God's word, but it's a living book. It reveals itself to you over time in certain situations and certain different times in your life, and that you will always be guided by the Holy Spirit, and that's kind of all we need. And I, as a Protestant, sure, but as somebody who's considering Catholicism, I understand the authority of the church now, but what do you do with that, and how would I respond to that, and what's your look on that?
So I think the mistake there is coming from Hebrews 4, verse 12. So in Hebrews 4:12, it says, the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And most Protestants today, if you say, what is that verse about? We'll say about the Bible. It's not. It's about Jesus. The very next line says, and before him, no creature is hidden, but all are open and laid bare to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. And so the idea that and then it says, since then we have a great high priest. The very next verse after that is very explicitly about Jesus as our high priest. He is the Word of God. In the beginning was the Word does not mean there was a King James Version 1611 edition next to the Father from all eternity. In the beginning was the Word means the second person of the Trinity, because the full revelation of God, revelation means unveiling, and the full revelation of God isn't the Bible, it's Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. He is the one who, if we have seen him, we've seen the Father. The full revelation isn't Jesus. And John tells us explicitly in his gospel, you couldn't reduce everything about Jesus to writing if you wanted to. If you were to try, the whole world wouldn't fill all the books, because he's infinite. And so the idea that the full revelation of God is in Scripture is just factually wrong. So the idea that the Word of God being living and active refers to the Bible, that's not correct either. Now, it's true, we can talk about, the Scriptures as Word of God in a secondary sense, but the primary sense has to be Jesus Christ. And if we put anything else, even the Bible, at the level of Jesus, we've turned this created thing, because the Bible is created. There's a time when it didn't exist. It's created. We've turned a created thing into a God by putting it at the level of God himself. Now, God breathes the Bible. He inspires it, and he works through it. He doesn't only work through that. And so it would be a mistake to kind of work from that starting premise. The second thing I'd say is, as for the idea that it's just so clear that, you're just going to read it, and you don't need the church, you don't need an interpretation, one need only to look at all of the different competing theologies and denominations and theologians in Protestantism to see that that's not true. There are a lot of people of goodwill who are doing their best to make sense of the Bible, who disagree about what it means, who disagree even about which books belong in it, and can't figure out from the pages themselves which other pages should be there, because no one page tells you, here are the other pages that belong, here are the other books that belong. And then, the last thing I say there is, in Acts chapter 8, if you remember that Philip goes down in Samaria, he sees the Ethiopian eunuch reading the scroll of Isaiah, and he is prompted by the Spirit to go up to him, and he asks him, do you understand what you were reading? And in Acts 8:31, the man says to him, how can I, unless someone guides me? So our job as Christians is not to assume we can figure it out all on our own, because no one in history has ever done that. Our job is to have the humility to realize God is working both through the Scriptures and, as 1 Timothy 3:15 says, through the church. Paul says to Timothy that the church is the pillar and foundation of truth. So to separate the Bible from the church that gave us the Bible, to separate the Bible from the pillar and foundation of truth, is to build on a really unstable foundation.
What do you think, Nathan?
Oh, that was great. I agree. I agree 100%.
Wonderful.
Well, I got to go to a break, but I wonder if you would like a copy. Well, you don't have to tell me, but if you'd like a copy of Joe's book, the one we've been talking about, the one that's on sale, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, I'd be happy to send you that. Did you want to send a different book, Joe? I couldn't tell by the look on your face.
Well, I was going to say, we'll send it to you for free, but we might want some CJ's Pizza if we're ever in that part of Virginia.
No, we definitely want. Yeah. There's no question. If we're in that part of Virginia, we will be coming to CJ's Pizza. There's no question about that.
Hey, you are welcome anytime.
And can we talk about a possible 2-for-1 special when we get there?
Hey,
that might be a good off-the-air question. This is
all right. We got to take a break. Thanks, Nathan. Right back with more Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Beyond Damascus with Dan Demite and Aaron Richards is our show for young adults.
Everybody's talking about encounter. Everybody's talking about that mountaintop experience. What we fail to often talk about is what happens after, what happens beyond that Damascus moment.
Jesus Christ is calling all of us to be missionary disciples, disciples of Jesus who are on mission to bring the kingdom of God here and now on this earth.
Beyond Damascus with Dan Demite and Aaron Richards, Saturday at 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest. Every single line full still. It's Ask Me Anything this hour. 888-318-7884 is the number. But fear not, we'll do another hour with Joe after this. So we've got lots of time to get to everybody on the line. Now we go up to Dana in Orange County, California. Just up the road from us, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Welcome, Dana. You got a question for Joe?
Yes, thank you. Joe, I appreciate our short little talks every once in a while, but I've been watching Shameless Potpourri, and in one of your, it's an excellent podcast, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if I'm allowed to plug it.
Go ahead.
I just did, so there we go.
There you go.
If this is boring, go over to Shem. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to get in direct competition. But yeah, I'm sorry, Danny. Go ahead. Where were you going?
Sure. Okay. So in one of your videos, the debate thing that you did with Dinesh D'Souza and Alice O'Connor, you're making this really necessary point of trivial differences and minor contradictions do not change what overall the authors are kind of presenting to the audience. I want to apply that logic to Jesus' apostles because we have several contradictory stories in all of the Gospels and the book of Acts in where Jesus' apostles, or some of them, are doubting his resurrection. They're doubting it in Galilee. There's stories of the apostles doubting his resurrection in Jerusalem in multiple locations over courses of time. So the overall context of this is there were doubts with Jesus' apostles. And I personally don't think the evidence is very strong that all of these doubts were reconciled, that some of them continue to have doubts. I anticipate you saying, no, they only doubted at the beginning, but they came to believe as things moved on. As we examine the timeline of the doubts actually get stronger down the timeline, not less strong. They start out, with Peter and John, Peter and the other disciple, kind of racing each other to the empty tomb. They believe immediately when they go inside. And then in Luke's gospel, Jesus has to actually tell his apostles, stop doubting and believe. And even then they did not believe it because of joy and amazement. And by the time we get to the ascension in the book of Acts, Jesus is having to spend 40 days with his apostles, providing many proofs to them that he's alive, and then he kind of disappears. So at any rate, those are my comments that the overall context of these contradictory stories is that Jesus' apostles, or some of them, doubted his resurrection. So my question would be to you is, did they doubt his resurrection?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would change the order of the timeline because chronologically, the first thing you have is the account you mentioned from Luke, that the women come and report that the tomb is empty. And these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they didn't believe them. And then we're told in the next verse, Peter arose and ran to the tomb. So the account of Peter and John at the tomb is chronologically after the initial disbelief of the women. Then you also have other, small d disciples, like on the road to Emmaus, who are slow to believe, or at least confused about the message, but they're not the 12. I assume you're asking about the 12. Then you have a week later, Thomas, that evening, Thomas is missing when Jesus appears to the 12, and so he is skeptical for another week. And a week later, Jesus appears to him. John records this in his account in John 20. And then chronologically after that, you have the mass appearance in Galilee. Now, I agree with William Lane Craig that because this is the one appearance that is forecast, meaning it's we're told to go tell the disciples to go up to Galilee to see Jesus. This is almost certainly the appearance to the 500 that St. Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 15. He doesn't explicitly tell us which time Jesus appeared to 500 people, but it would seem to be the time where Jesus told a group of people to show up. Because you can imagine, as word spread, even people who weren't directly invited are like, well, I'm not going to just stay home if Jesus is appearing. And so there's this line in Matthew 28 where it says, many believed and some doubted. So depending on how you read that some could mean some of the apostles. It actually says they believe, but some doubted. That could mean some of the apostles, but I don't think that's what's being said there. I think it's saying the apostles believed, but some of those in the hundreds of people who'd come to see doubted. Because also, in an appearance of 500 people, you probably have people in a better or worse position to see for themselves. Just kind of by the nature of the event. So I think you have a pretty clear timeline there where of the 12, 11 of them come to believe by Easter. Another one comes to believe, or I guess 10 of the 11 come to believe by Easter, and then Thomas believes a week later. But then other disciples, it's probably on their own timelines, that it might be incremental. It might take some of them a while to believe. And then, Jesus is appearing over this course of 40 days, and we don't know all of the appearances that he has. So I would suggest that's what I see in the biblical evidence. What do you think, Dana?
So no, this is somewhat speculative, though. It also requires, based on your timeline, that John's gospel is wrong and that Luke is correct, because John's gospel depicts Peter and the other disciple who everybody thinks is John. I don't agree with that, but that's another conversation. They run to the tomb in John's gospel right after Mary reports the tomb being empty, and they believe immediately. And then I believe the same day, Jesus appears to his apostles in John's gospel later on in that same afternoon, and everybody's believing and joyous, where Luke's gospel has Jesus having to get mad at them. And even after he gets mad at them, it states in the gospel they still didn't believe it because of joy and amazement. So, we have these contradictions for sure, so we have to decide which one of them's right. But John's gospel depicts the apostles believing immediately, and Luke's gospel has quite a lot of doubt in it. I think John's gospel does something absolutely brilliant. It blames all of the doubts on one guy, Thomas. But the other Gospels, it's multiple apostles that are doubting it. I also have a quick comment about Paul's 500. This is very common, but nobody mentions that the people Paul's writing to do not believe in the resurrection themselves. And also Mark's Gospel has this, added.
Well, hang on. The people he's writing to do believe in the resurrection. They are confused about our bodily resurrection, not Jesus's. Like Paul makes the point that Jesus' resurrection is first fruits of the general bodily resurrection. And so he's using the agreed upon point that Jesus rose from the dead to establish the disputed point, which is the ultimate goal of Christianity is not to just live in heaven with God in a disembodied way. It's bodily resurrection, our bodily resurrection, not just Jesus's. And so that's the point Paul's making pretty explicitly in 1 Corinthians 15, that Jesus is the Adam of a new creation. And so what he's experiencing in bodily resurrection is not a one-off, but it's the beginning of a new way of living.
Dana, I'm sorry, but there's the music. That means we have to take this top of the hour break, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes. But if you're on the line, hey, stay on the line. We're going to come right back with Joe. We'll do another hour of Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer. If you haven't dialed yet, there might be a line or two open during the break, 888-318-7884. The lines have stayed full the entire first hour, so you may have to dial more than once to get in, but we would love to talk with you wherever you are and whatever your situation is, whether you're a believer or not a believer, whether you are Catholic or anything else. If you've got a question about the faith, about Jesus, about the Bible, about the Christian life, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. As promised, Joe Heschmeyer with us for another hour, and it's Ask Me Anything. If you've got a question you'd like to ask about any aspect of the Catholic faith, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. I'd like to welcome our new sponsor, CJ's Pizza in Virginia. He's just finding out about this now, but he is now a sponsor. We'll send you the bill. 888, that was Nathan, right? We'll send you the bill, Nathan. 888-318-7884 is the number if you would like to call and ask Joe a question. Joe Heschmeyer, author of a bunch of books, including Pope Peter and A Man Named Joseph and others, but also this book.
The Eucharist is really Jesus.
The Eucharist is, I'm sorry, Joe, that I didn't mention every single one of them. Go ahead, please. Give us a comprehensive list.
Trying to help.
Oh, you thought I was forgetting.
Like Catholic Answers published. Yeah.
No, I was trying to get around to this, that this one's on sale.
Okay.
The Early Church is the Catholic Church. On sale for $10 right now. Free shipping inside the United States. Just go to shop.catholic.com to get it. All right, I'll tell you what. Ask Me Anything means you can ask whatever you would like, and you should feel welcome, whether you're Catholic or not, whether you know a lot about this stuff. Excuse me, I beg your pardon. Whether you know a lot about it or you're a neophyte to organized religion, whatever. Your question is welcome here, and we enjoy having these conversations. You should feel welcome, like you're making our day better. If you call 888-318-7884. Joe, you got any speaking engagements or anything coming up that I should have said in the first hour and then I didn't say? Or
No, none that you should have said, but I'm going to Dodge City.
Are you really? You're going to Dodge
Looking
City?
Forward to it.
That's
I was
what,
in Hayes this past weekend. The people in Hayes and in Colby, Kansas were very lovely. Even though I'm now a Missourian, I referred to us as Kansans at one point, and they really liked that. It was a slip of the tongue, but apparently it goes deep. Kansasness. So.
I had the great privilege of going to Hayes, Kansas not too long ago, and I also found them lovely. I did not know anything about the Volga Germans. I learned about the Volga Germans when I was there.
Yes, these are the Germans that went to Russia, and then they got kicked out of Russia, and so then they went to Kansas, and they do everything. So if you want a priest, if you want a church
these are the
built,
Germans that went to Russia before the famous time that the Germans went to Russia.
Which of the two
in the
famous
Second
times the
World
Germans
War?
went to Russia?
These
Germans were invited into Russia.
Yeah, they were invited.
They got invited into Russia and then invited to leave Russia. And they were the farmers, and so the northern stretch of Kansas has a lot of them, and great food. And very, very hardworking culture. And so there's kind of a stereotype in Kansas that if you need something done, you can just kind of ask the Volga Germans, and they'll volunteer to do it.
Joe, just so you know, they're not the only Germans that have the reputation for being hardworking. that is a common trait that Germans are known for.
Fair enough.
888-318-7884 is the number here. Dodge City, of course, that's where Wyatt Earp was marshal there at one point, right? Wasn't he marshal there?
I believe that is correct. It's weird thinking of that as like the Wild West because it does not feel that Western.
No, it's not really. The way that we think about the West now, it's not Western. But, it was
kind of Middle West.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Maxwell in Maryland watching on YouTube. Maxwell, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hey, guys. I'd just like to, first of all, thank you, Joe, and everybody there at Catholic Answers for being absolutely pivotal in my conversion or reversion to the Catholic Church.
Welcome back home, brother.
My question... Thank you. So my question, I don't really know how to phrase it well, but so there's a YouTube channel called Esoterica. It's this guy, Dr. Justin Sledge. He did about a 2.5-hour two-part series about the extra-biblical evidence for the evolution of what was then kind of Canaanite polytheism into Yahwistic, was it henotheism, monolatry type thing, into eventually Second Temple Judaic monotheism, into eventually Christianity. My question is how do, as Catholics, we reconcile kind of this disparity, I guess you could say, between all of this supposed extra biblical evidence for this kind of more evolutionary history of belief in the region, as opposed to the kind of traditional Judeo-Christian belief that, well, God is and always has been as he is.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if that
No,
makes
that's
sense.
a very clear question. So I would say a lot of the story of the Old Testament is introducing the Israelites both to the fact that there is a God of Israel and to the more profound fact that he's the God of the whole world, including of the Gentiles, and to the fact that the beings being worshipped by their pagan neighbors are not true gods, even if they are spiritual beings. And so this is like the very broad, and it really goes on even into the New Testament. So just to give a few examples, the plagues of Egypt appear to be mocking the impotence of the Egyptian gods. So you've got like a god of the Nile, and then you've got the real God turning the Nile to blood. Though that kind of thing, a God of light, and God creates darkness. And it's just like, look, these people that the magicians and the priests of Egypt claim are gods are not real gods. They may be spiritual beings. They may be even powerful spiritual beings, but they're no match to the true God, who is the God of Israel. Second, this still, people tend to be very localized. They imagine, okay, well, this is the God of my place. But this is one of the reasons why the Babylonian captivity is so psychologically jarring for the Israelites, because they're no longer in Israel. And so is God still with them if they're not in the promised land? And they very slowly come to a realization that the answer to that is yes. I mean, God is telling them this repeatedly, but they keep turning to the gods of their pagan neighbors because they're kind of when in Rome, do what the Babylonians do. That kind of mentality. Jonah is a good example of this. Like, Jonah runs from God because he doesn't want to proclaim to the Ninevites that the God of Israel is also the God of Nineveh. But in running from God, he's falling into this trap of regionalizing God. And so there's this very funny scene when he's on the boat, and he explains that he serves the God of earth and sea and sky. And it's like, well, why did you think you could get away from him on the water? Like, listen to what you're saying, buddy. And so the point of that story, in no small part, is to get across that this is not just your local tribal deity. This is the God of the whole universe. And so it changes isn't anything about, like, if you're following the story from Genesis onwards, God is saying this the whole time. But people keep having too small of a view of God, and then he keeps growing kind of their understanding of him over time. And it really is through things like the Babylonian captivity, where they come to see that God is with them wherever they go and whatever happens to them, that I think helps to finally shake them out of this. The last thing I'll say here, and then I'm happy to hear kind of your thoughts and anything you want maybe further explanation on. St. Paul talks about how the way we can talk about God and gods. And David Bentley Hart has a book, I think it's called The Experience of God, where he talks about how the Bible, like a lot of other ancient religions, distinguishes between one God and then many lesser spiritual beings. So you can call those spiritual beings angels, demons, jinn, or gods. But whatever you're calling them, they're not the uncreated creator of everything. They are created spiritual beings that are higher than us, but lower than the one true God. And so in that sense, like, the ancient pagans and the ancient Israelites were right to believe that in addition to God, there are the Elohim, there are the other gods, not in the sense of being God like God. And so we usually use other terms like spirits or angels for them, or in some cases demons, even if they're evil. But they are higher than us and lower than the one God of everything.
Okay.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I don't want to. I mean, you raised a very good big question. I wanted to make sure that I answered it to your satisfaction.
No. Yeah. No, that's a very, very, very thought-provoking answer. I guess sort of a secondary question I had kind of along this topic one of the other points that I one of the other questions I had along this line while learning about kind of the archaeological evidence related to a lot of this stuff is one thing that a lot of these kind of proponents of this type of argument, I guess you could say, is that the sort of modern conception of God can kind of be traced back to a syncretization between a couple of the different Canaanite gods of the time. Is that more so, like you said?
I'm actually pretty skeptical of all those claims. I think Israel is pretty distinct, being monotheistic, and it seems to be very clear that they are intentionally quite different from their neighbors. Now, they use some of the same language. Think about how many things have Baal in the title in the Old Testament. Like Baal Judah is where the Ark of the Covenant is. And it's in Israelite hands, but it's still named after a pagan god. So you can see that there's certainly pagan influences on the culture and even on some of the language. Like some of the words they have for God are words that, Baal means Lord. And so the language around God, in part, is shaped by the culture in which they live. That's true of every religion and every culture. Like the language you have for God is going to be culturally built in, which is, this is one of the difficulties when they tried to bring Christianity into China, is there wasn't a good theological vocabulary for God because the culture hadn't been formed in that way. And so you had like Lord of the Sky kind of language, which doesn't quite do justice to the idea of God. So by all means, linguistically, there's a shaping that we could point to, and that doesn't seem particularly controversial. But the uniqueness of God revealing himself to Israel really does seem to be, the result of it really does seem to be that you have this radically monotheistic people on their best behavior, surrounded by polytheists, and them not getting along very well with one another.
Maxwell, I got to take the break. Thank you for the call. Lots of folks on the line. We'll continue with Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer right after this.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Church Pop takes a fresh and fun look at the news shaping our world, featuring engaging, inspiring, and informative Catholic social media content. Find it on Snapchat, Instagram, and on the web at churchpop.com. And you can get Church Pop emailed directly to your inbox. Visit EWTN.com and click subscribe. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Joe Heschmeyer is our guest. Joe's I think it was it Maxwell? I guess a couple people have mentioned Joe's podcast, and I'll just mention it to you. You should check out Shameless Popery. And Joe is a shameless papist. He started Shameless Popery as a blog. It's now a podcast. It's got YouTube, a YouTube manifestation. Just check out shamelessjoe.com and you can find out all about it. Joe takes the time a couple times a week to look at important apologetics questions, important faith questions, and it is growing and growing in popularity. I think I remember I told you about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 months ago, they showed me the chart. And I didn't like the chart. It was like, here's all the stuff you do. Here's what Joe does. And yours was like the Beatles or something shooting up. But my chart's
it had a lot more room to grow. It's the newest. So
that's very nice of you to say.
If you go from 1 to 2.
But in all sincerity, I mean, it is wonderful. I think that there's a reason for that growth. What you're getting there is really high quality stuff. Some of the best Catholic reflections that you can get on the internet. Joe he's a fan. Joe is a fan. I'm going to just tell you right now of Father Mike Schmitz. Every time you say Father Mike Schmitz, he's like, his stuff is so great. Well, Joe's not alone out out there in producing high-quality stuff, but it's a small group, and Joe is in that group. Check out shamelessjoe.com, Shameless Pokery.
Lower your expectations if you're expecting Father Mike quality.
Yeah, well, I don't know about it. You know what? I don't know that you guys do two different things. You do two different things.
We do very different things. It's true.
Yeah. It's if he's the Beatles, then you're
Herman's.
I was gonna say it, dog nugget. Herman's. Let's see. Where am I going? Am I going to Maria in Ohio? Somebody help me out. All right. I guess I'm going to Maria
in Ohio, line 4.
Maria in Ohio, listening on Light of Light. We're happy you're there, Maria. Go ahead with your question. Are you there, Maria? Mute button, Maria. Mute button. Thank you for muting, but you're still on mute.
There is such a thing as too much of a good thing.
All right, Maria, we're going to come back to you. I promise it. We're going to come back to you. We're not one of those hateful radio shows that likes to hang up on. Well, we're not one of those hateful radio shows that says publicly they like to hang up on people. John is in Oklahoma, listening to EWTN on Channel 130 Sirius XM satellite radio. John, we're awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
All right, Joe. I'm sure you'll be able to answer this without a problem, but it kind of popped in my head. Okay, we all know that Judas betrayed Jesus, and then after he did that, he killed himself. Okay, he was replaced. How did they come up with his replacement, and what kind of a timeline was there in picking the right person to replace him?
Joe, do you get this question lots?
I don't get this question lot.
I did a Joe Heschmeyer. Thank you, everyone.
Just a
Thank
little
you.
too late. You had me hanging by a thread there. That was tasteless. So, okay, after Jesus' ascension, before Pentecost, so between 40 and 50 days after Easter, this is the timeline. It's all mentioned in Acts chapter 1. Then they come together. They're the first novena is this period between Ascension and Pentecost, where they're praying together in the upper room, and there's about 120 of them, and Peter is leading them, and he proclaims the need to replace Judas, and he cites the scripture for it. And so the standard he gives is, so one of the men who've accompanied us during all the time that the Lord Jesus went in and out among us, beginning from the baptism of John until the day when he was taken up from us, one of these men must become with us a witness to his resurrection. So the criterion is that it's someone who accompanied Jesus from the beginning of his public ministry through the resurrection. And this group of 120, they put forward 2 candidates, Joseph, called Barsabbas, which would have been a great, but also surnamed Justus. So maybe it would have been confusing because he has 3 names, and Matthias, and then they draw lots. And Matthias is the one that is chosen to replace Judas.
Okay, because I was trying to figure it out. I knew that Judas was replaced. Okay, so that would bring them back to the 12 disciples. But
That's right.
there's a period where they still referring to his followers as 11. The 11.
Yeah, that's right. Well, after that, it says Peter gets up with the 11. And what's being signified there is that Peter has a special role beyond even that of the apostles. And this is actually one of the things that points to Peter as the first pope, frankly. That word isn't used, but you see you have the apostles. And then so if it says like Buddy Holly and the Crickets, you don't need me to tell you which of them is the lead singer. It's the one who gets singled out by name. And so one of the terms that the Eastern church fathers use for St. Peter is, I believe it's Coryphaeus, which was like the band leader. It was the person who led the song and dance with music. So he would set the tempo and you get the dance going. And that's the role St. Peter has among the apostles. He's the the person leading the orchestra. He's the person setting the beat. And so that's kind of this role that he has. So Peter and the 11 doesn't mean there aren't 12, because a chapter before we see they get their number up to 12 again. It's referring to one of them, Peter, having this special role to play.
Okay, well then that makes sense. Now, just a quick follow up here. Okay, you referred to Father Mike Schmidt, as the Beatles. then what would Bishop Robert Barron be considered in the music world?
Beethoven.
Stones.
Oh, Stones. I went with Beethoven. You went with the Stones.
I mean, if we're going with 60s music.
Okay, all right. He's just so classy, though.
Elvis? I don't know.
Nobody's
Elvis
Elvis.
feels weird.
Yeah, no. John, thanks. Hey, if you'd like a copy of Joe's book, Pope Peter, since you just discussed Pope Peter with Joe, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just hang on. Edgar will get an address. We'll send it out to you. And I got to keep moving. Don is in Central Jersey, listening on Domestic Church Radio. Don, welcome. Go ahead with your question.
Well, thank you. I was wondering if Joe was familiar with the Gospel of Thomas, and if he is, can he explain a little about why it's considered uninspired?
Yeah. So it's called the Gospel of Thomas, but it's a little bit misleading because it's not actually written by Thomas, and no scholar believes that it is. The earliest dates that I've seen are around the year 60, but the more accurate ones, I think, would be in the 100s or 200s, so 2nd or 3rd century. And so it's what the technical term is pseudo-epigraphical. That means it claims to be by someone that's not actually by. And it's also heretical. It's Gnostic. So it's possible for an early text to be not inspired but still be a good document. But in this case, it's a series of fake conversations with Jesus in which he's teaching Gnostic doctrines. I'm going to give you just the last line of the Gospel of Thomas. Simon Peter, this is verse 114. Simon Peter said to him, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." And you might think Jesus would respond to that by being like, "Whoa, Peter, that's incredibly sexist." But no, he doesn't say that. He says, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven."
Well, that
so,
doesn't sound like Jesus.
It's weird. Sorry, say that again.
That sounds like the things that are going on today.
Well, it does, yeah, but it's
I guess if she wants
to
to compete in men's sports or something.
But he doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, but Gnosticism is not. Well, I mean, I don't know. I suppose there is a Gnostic element to the transgenderism stuff. But explain why that's Gnostic and not Christian. What's being taught there, Joe?
Yeah. So, for one of the defining features of Gnosticism is a disdain for the body, and so the notion of being freed from your body so that your spirit can be freed. Soma sema is the Greek expression, body prison. That is not the Christian message. The message is not that God comes into the world to free you from your body, but he comes to glorify you and your body. Like this, I mean, and well, not just you and but you are your soul and body. You're not just your soul. And so the Christian message is not soul good, body bad. And that is very much what Gnosticism operates from. It's what's called dualistic. And so it just is fundamentally not rooted in Christianity. The other thing to know is what makes Gnosticism work is, and where it gets its name, is this idea of gnosis, which is secret knowledge. And so the appeal of Gnosticism is, ooh, I've got some knowledge that everybody else doesn't have, so I'm special and unique. But it also works because they can't say, hey, remember when Jesus preached this really crazy stuff? Because people will be like, no, and we heard him preach. But if they're like, yeah, but he has these hidden teachings you didn't know about. If we're using the 60s musical themes, these are the basement tapes. Like this is the really good, not studio release stuff you've never even heard of. And that inspires a certain kind of person to respond to that. But it contradicts all of Jesus's public teaching. And so it matters that when Jesus is arrested, he makes the point that what he taught openly. He has no gnosis. He has no secret knowledge that he's privately giving the disciples that contradicts what he's saying publicly. He may explain things more in private. We know he does that, but he doesn't contradict himself and give a different set of teachings.
Thank you very much, Don. I hope that was helpful to you. It's always so invigorating, I think, to hear some of the things, because we have no memory of it. It's too long ago. It's too hidden from us of how women were thought of in the ancient world, and the broad assumptions about women's bodies, women's worth, all that. And so we don't realize, I think often we don't realize how totally different Jesus is in that regard.
Yes. Yeah, I think there is this idea that, Christianity is this horribly retrograde, sexist kind of relic of the past. But a lot of the ways we get from the past to now is precisely the radical nature of Christian teaching on the equality of the sexes. I don't remember who it was who pointed out that 100 years ago, 50 years ago even, if you were going to pass a building named after a woman, it was either going to be a queen or a saint.
Yeah.
And so, that's, other than that, everything in the external world was male dominated. But you have all of these female saints. You have this constant reminder of the goodness and worth of women.
And Jesus would never have said a woman had to become a man to be saved or something like that. That's utterly foreign to his mind.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll take a quick break. Thanks, Don. We'll be right back with more Ask Me Anything with Joe. Many people have forgotten just how revolutionary the Bible creation stories are. But the first 3 chapters of Genesis are a powerful challenge to anyone in any generation who would undervalue human lives. In the Beginning, the new book by Monica Migliorino Miller will take you on a fantastic journey through the first chapters of Genesis, unfolding the richness of life as God sees it. Get In the Beginning today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
When it comes to Catholic teachings about Mary, there's one question we hear more than any other. Where is that in the Bible? The answer? Everywhere. In Bible Mary, the Mother of Jesus and the Word of God, Father John Weiss opens Scripture to reveal a Mary who has been hiding in plain sight. Order your copy of Bible Mary today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns to the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. Join special guests Scott and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, and an all-star lineup of speakers September 26th through 29th. Spend time with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and our special guests right here in beautiful San Diego. Seats are still available, but going fast. We'd love to see you there. Register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest. He of Shameless Popery, shamelessjoe.com is where you can find it. Also of this book that's on sale right now, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, $10 right over at shop.catholic.com. Free delivery in the United States. Are you going to the Seek conference in January?
I am going to the Seek conference in January.
Do you know where it's going to be?
It's Salt Lake City, I believe.
Yep, and that's where our next caller is calling from. Luke's in Salt Lake City, Utah, watching on YouTube. Did you know that there's going to be like 30,000 Catholics descending on Salt Lake City in January? Luke?
I actually just learned about that the other day.
Oh, well, are you Catholic, or are you Mormon, or like something else? Like, is this good news or bad news for you? Is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, so I think good news. I don't know. I'm on paper I'm still Mormon, but I'm kind of looking for another team at the moment.
Well, guess what? We're recruiting for our
open
team.
enrollment.
We are
We're
yes, and as you can tell, our standards are extremely low. So you're welcome to come in.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I figure it's either you guys or one of the magisterial Protestants is sort of what I've narrowed it down to. But
Oh, we can talk you out of that. All right, let's go with your question.
Yeah. All right. Well, actually, I have another question about Judas, sort of like the previous caller, a couple callers ago. So after he killed himself, the other apostles elected Matthias to the apostleship, and so coming from a LDS background, they use that as an evidence for the continuation of the office of apostle. So I'm wondering why, in the Catholic point of view, that office didn't continue. Maybe it does in some way, but and then I figured that would be a quick answer, so I have a second question.
Okay,
All right,
I'll do your first one, and then I'll make sure you get a second one.
Yeah.
The quick answer is the office of apostle is specifically tied. I don't know if you heard when I mentioned to the previous caller in Acts 1:21 to 22, the criteria for being an apostle among the 12 is that you had to have been with them from Jesus's baptism through his resurrection. And so that is going to be a very hard criterion to fulfill for everyone born after the time of the first century. So we don't see anyone historically. So, I would turn the question around to Mormons and say, okay, so who else came after, so read Acts and you'll see the death of several apostles. For instance, James. Who replaced James? Nobody. And so, we don't see an ongoing, we see a one-time event of them replacing Judas and St. Peter, explaining from the Psalms why this had been a prophesied desecration of the apostleship, and that he'd left the office desolate and it's going to be filled. The other thing I'd say is in Luke 22, we're told that the 12 are 12. They're going to be sitting on 12 thrones. Judas leaves his throne, so to speak, and so it's replaced by Matthias. Even when we talk about St. Paul as an apostle or the apostle, he's not numbered among the 12. He has a different role. He's still an apostle in the literal sense of being sent, but he has a somewhat different calling. He's not he's not being invited into the 12. He's not being held to the standards of membership in the 12 because Paul wasn't there for this part of Jesus's ministry. So there's something unique to the first century about this. However, the notion of this kind of top-down structured leadership does survive, and you see what the apostles are doing by reading the book of Acts. They are appointing presbyters and they're appointing bishops. And so that continues on after the apostles go away. So I would say, if you want to compare which version of church history is right between the Mormon and the Catholic one, read the early Christians from the early 100s. And what you'll see is vibrantly Christian, people willing to be martyred for the faith, like St. Ignatius of Antioch, who were trained by the disciples, and they weren't named as apostles because that was a one-time event. I don't know, does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, no, that helps, and that's good to have kind of more detail. I figured it was something like needing to know Christ in person, but having more detail on that is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. What was your second question?
So my second question was with the atonement. I guess there's this sort of moral quandary that I'm wondering how it works out, because a lot of times the atonement is, they use an allegory of paying a debt, like we owe a debt and God or Jesus pays it, and so we're forgiven that way, which makes sense in terms of debt. But in terms of crimes where different types of crimes, like murder, for example, if I murdered somebody's son, the judge can't say, oh, okay, well, we'll kill this other random person for justice. That wouldn't be just. So how do you square that with and I know it's not, the same thing, but I was wondering how.
No, this is great.
Sort of would be.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention I have podcast episodes, 2 recent ones on Judas, and another one on the atonement. And the atonement one is called something like "How does Jesus' death work?" Something, a title like that. That's going to make it hard to look up on YouTube, but hopefully you can find. There's an hour-long version of that, which is to say, you're absolutely right. If we understand this in terms of what's sometimes called penal substitution, that the wrath of the Father is poured out upon the Son, then it would apparently be unjust. Because in no sense of justice is me getting really mad at Cy and then punching my dog an acceptable. Well, I should punch Cy if he's the one. You know what I mean? That it doesn't make any sense. But if your dog caused the problem and you pay for it, that's not someone unleashing their wrath. That is you as someone more capable than the dog, making things right. And so we have caused a problem with sin that we can't make right on our own. And so Jesus makes it right for us. But it's not that he's having like the wrath of God poured out upon him. Rather, it is that he offers something to the Father more beautiful and more perfect than all of our sin is displeasing. That the perfect obedience the Son shows, the immense love the Son shows as God and man, is worth more and is more pleasing to God than all of our sins and all the sins in all of human history is displeasing to God. Because Jesus is of infinite worth and infinite dignity as a divine person with a human nature. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this, where he's asking the question of whether there is a more suitable way of delivering the human race than by Christ's passion. Because he makes the argument, look, if the debt is owed to God, you can always forgive a debt that's owed to you. God could have just snapped his finger and said, don't worry about sin. He's not held to some, no one's going to call it and be like, hey, you can't forgive him. I didn't give you permission. Who's going to give God permission? So then the question is, okay, well, if he could have snapped his fingers, why does he instead allow Jesus to become incarnate and die on the cross? Like, why is that still a good thing? And Aquinas gives 5 reasons. The first of them is that it lets us know how much God loves us, and in turn, that we'll be stirred to love him in return. Second, to show us what it looks like to be obedient, humble, constant, just, and all the other virtues. Third, because he doesn't just deliver us from sin, he also merits additional graces for us. That's a whole theology of grace that I'll probably just leave aside for now, except to say that Jesus goes above and beyond what is strictly required in justice by any reading of this. He goes above and beyond for our sake, and he's winning good things for us theologically. Fourth, because we're more likely to refrain from sin when we see the wages of sin. And then fifth, and my favorite one, that it redounds to man's greater dignity, which is to say, as men, we caused the problem of sin, Adam and Eve, and then all humans ever since. And rather than, like if you've got kids and they screw things up, it's easy to just like solve the problem for them and just be like, I'll take care of it. But it is much more dignified, and it honors your kids more to allow them to have a role in cleaning up their own mess. Even if they're too weak to do it on their own, if you can stoop to their level and help them, even if you're the one actually getting it done, making it so it's not just worse of a mess, that still gives a greater dignity of agency to them by allowing them to cooperate in this. And so on the cross, we don't just have God, we have a man. And so when you look at the ledger of human deeds, you have a lot of horrible misdeeds, but you also have Jesus. And that outweighs all of the other stuff. And so it isn't just that it makes us right before God, it's that it gives a dignity to Homo sapiens. It gives dignity to humanity that we didn't have before.
Luke, I'll tell you what, a couple things. First of all, we have a book called Why We're Catholic that I would be happy to send to you. I have to go to the break, so just 2 things before I go to the break. One, Joe and I and other Catholic Answers folks will be at the SEEK conference. If you'd like to talk about the Catholic faith, we'd be happy to meet with you in person when we're there in Salt Lake City. Just
I'll happily grab a coffee if you're able to do that. I don't know if you're at a place where coffee is an acceptable hot drink.
Yeah, no, that's just mean, Joe. That is.
I'm not. I was going to invite him to coffee, and then I thought, oh, maybe that's rude. Well, if you want to grab a coffee, I won't even ask for a beer.
Or a if you'd like to get a non-caffeinated beverage, we'd be happy to do
coffee.
that. Yeah, right.
Not technically a hot
We'll
drink.
just load up on caffeine before we get there. But the other thing, Luke, we'd be happy to see you. You're welcome to call here. All you got to do to be Catholic, you got to be repentant of your sins and accept Jesus Christ and his church. And that's what I mean when I say we have a low standard. We're all sinners, and this is a place for sinners to receive God's grace, and we want you to receive that grace. The last thing I had to say is I have in the past told officials of the Latter-day Saints that I would be careful about saying Mormon. They don't love it. They would prefer that I say Latter-day Saints. I think being respectful to people is if they ask you to call them something, you should call them that. And so I apologize. I should have said sometimes known as the Mormons, and they are the Latter-day Saints. So I want to be clear about that. We'll take a quick break. Right back with more Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is Just a Guy in the Pew with John Edwards. We're talking Catholic man to Catholic man, discussing the struggles, challenges, and unimaginable joy of following Christ. You can hear this and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world, all in one place, all free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest. Lots of folks on the line. Scott is in Sussex, Virginia. If you're anywhere near CJ's Pizza, get over there. Scott, go ahead with your question for Joe.
All right, well, I'll take a look for that pizza place. But my question is this. I have several friends, Protestant friends, that ask questions, and I'm really happy to share my Catholic faith with them. The one question I am absolutely terrified of them asking is this, and I want to ask how you would respond as an apologist. It's how can you defend the teachings of the Catholic Church when there are bishops, cardinals, and sometimes even seemingly the Pope who refuse to do it, and when there are bishops and cardinals who are openly advocating redefining truth and redefining sin. So can you help me with that, please?
Yeah, it's a good question. We know that in the true church, there will be weeds that grow up alongside the wheat. We know that in the true church, Matthew 13:47-50, that the net of the church contains both good and bad fish, meaning both the saved and the unsaved. And we know in the true church that this includes, at times, wicked church leaders. The son of perdition, Judas Iscariot, was called by Jesus. John 6, the very last two verses, Jesus says, "Did I not call you 12, and one of you is a devil?" That is about as clear as it gets. So we don't allow human sinfulness and wickedness to turn us away from the true church, because it's one of the things we know about the true church is that there will be wicked people present there. St. Paul warns that after his departure, fierce wolves will come in, not sparing the flock. And so you have over and over again these warnings about false prophets and heretics and everything else arising within the church. And so to then say, but look, there are false prophets and heretics arising within the church, even among her clergy, you could raise that objection at any point for the last 2,000 years, including in the first century. That's where I would start. That is just not a good reason. Like when I say I'm Catholic, I say I believe what the Catholic Church teaches. It doesn't mean I agree with every fellow Catholic. I don't have to agree with every fellow Catholic. It doesn't mean I agree with every homily I've ever heard. It doesn't mean I agree with every theologian I've ever read. It doesn't mean any of those things, because the church has a means of defining what is and isn't Catholic teaching. And so this is, ironically, I would suggest a point of strength as a Catholic. There is such a thing as being a bad Catholic. I can be a person who identifies as Catholic and rejects the explicit teaching of the Catholic Church. I don't know how I could be a bad Protestant. I could be a Protestant who believes baptism does something, or a Protestant who believes baptism doesn't do something. But since there's no Protestant body to tell me which way I'm supposed to believe, I'm not a bad Protestant, I'm just a different Protestant. And so the point is, in Catholicism, there is a standard. And there's a standard of truth that we can live up to or not live up to. It's not left to my personal interpretation or my own opinions or anything like that. So I think the fact that there are bad Catholics, as paradoxical as it is actually a comforting reminder that there are standards. Standards they're not living up to, surely. But there are standards, and there's a clear sense of the truth, nevertheless.
You know what? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll come back to you real quick, Scott. I'm just trying to get to everybody. Was that answer acceptable to you?
I think that was fantastic. I really appreciate that. I really do. Thank you.
Good. I'm happy to hear that.
Name one of your books, Joe. We'll send it to Scott if he wants it.
Yeah, how about The Eucharist is Really Jesus? If you haven't read that yet, it's not related to this, but it's my latest one. So.
All right, we will send it to you if you'd like, Scott. Just hang on the line, give us an address, and we'll send you The Eucharist is Really Jesus. Hugh is in Livermore, California, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Hugh, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Yes, I was confirmed when I was 16 back in the 70s, and I picked the confirmation name Isaac, but I wasn't thinking of a particular saint. I was actually thinking of a secular person. I was kind of being countercultural the way teenagers sometimes are. And so I guess I since I use that name, I was thinking I should maybe pick an actual saint to use as sort of someone to ask to pray for me as sort of a confirmation saint. Does that make any sense, what I'm saying?
It does. It does. Because in the strange providence of God, sometimes you'll have someone who just chooses a name because it's a cool name, and God can still use that as a way where he might have still placed that desire on your heart. So if I were you, there's just read up on St. Isaac Jogues, one of the North American martyrs. And there's tremendous stuff written about him.
Read about him.
Wonderful.
And there's Isaac the Syrian. And
yes.
But I also was kind of wondering about Abraham's son, Isaac.
The patriarch, yeah.
I was...
My kids recently asked me if they're in heaven, and the answer is yes.
Yeah, and so just the idea that maybe he was old enough really to have actually accepted being bound before he was supposedly sacrificed. Just that kind of submission to what God had asked, seems like something very powerful to maybe have as a patron saint.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The fact that he carries the wood up the hill is seen as a foreshadowing of Christ carrying the wood of the cross up Golgotha. And so many people, like when we have a mental image of the sacrifice of Isaac, or more accurately, the binding of Isaac, in Genesis 22, we imagine a kid, but the very next thing that we see in Genesis 23 is his mother dying, and then he gets married. And so, we don't know exactly how old he is, but he doesn't seem to be a small child.
I'll tell you what, Hugh, I'm going to leave it there because I want to get some more folks on. Everybody in North America, you are a North American, though, and I'm not trying to talk you out of Isaac the Patriarch, but as Joe mentioned and you mentioned, Isaac Jogues is every North American should know him, I think, and his companions. Hugh, thanks. Let's go to Joshua in Mississippi. Joshua, thank you very much for the call. Let me get the right button here. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Okay, can you hear me?
Very well,
yeah, we sure can.
Okay, first, before I ask the question, I just wanted to say I have your book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. So far as I've read into it, everything follows.
Well good. Happy to hear that.
My question was, some of Pope Francis's comments and some of the documents from Vatican II regarding Islam.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Pope Francis has said that Muslims worship the same God as we do, and that we're in a sort of communion, from what I could gather. To my understanding,
I hadn't heard that
he's
one.
not saying that we're in full
I'm not
communion.
sure about the sort of communion line, or I'd want to see kind of the context for that. He sometimes talks about being brothers and sisters on a human level with people, but they're not baptized, so they don't share that kind of baptismal fraternity.
Right. I know that, but like that in a very broken way, that we're in a communion because we worship at the base level the same God, but there's a lot of accusations that it's ecumenism to the first degree.
Yeah, so I don't know that I completely understand that objection, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. I know Lumen Gentium talks about this, that Muslims professing to hold the faith of Abraham along with us adore the one and merciful God, who on the last day will judge mankind. And so the point there is, you've got people who just say, I reject the God of Abraham, and then you have people who misunderstand the God of Abraham. And Muslims pretty clearly fall in the second group. Like, in saying that they adore the same God or worship the same God, we're not saying Muslim theology and Christian theology is the same or equally good or equally valid or the worship is equally satisfying to God. But throughout the scriptures, you find people both worshiping false gods sometimes and worshiping the true God falsely. So, for instance, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, they're struck dead for offering unholy fire to the true God. And so it is possible that the error is misdirected worship of the true God or bad theology about the true God, just as it's possible for someone to just reject the God of Abraham completely and worship some other God. So historically, Christians have always said Islam is even almost like a Christian heresy. This is one of the reasons for a long time Christians called it Mohammedanism. It wasn't as an insult. It's because that's the way you normally refer to a heretical movement. You name it after the founder. And so it was a recognition that this is clearly coming in some way from what we know about God, but it's getting things wrong. So it's not a validation of like everything's okay, but it is recognizing that we have something in common with Muslims that we don't have in common with, say, Cherokee traditional belief or something like this.
Yeah, that tracks.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. All right. He's already got the early church was the Catholic Church, so send him one of your other books.
Oh yeah. Why don't I send you The Eucharist is Really Jesus?
If you would hang on, Joshua, we will get you that. I think that's.
We want to try to do the last
All
call.
right. We can try. Bill in Ohio, if you could be super quick, just give Joe your question. We can do our best to get you an answer. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I was. It's 9/11, and 23 years ago, there was the attack, and I think about the anti-Semitism, but I also think about the Apostle Paul, St. Paul's letter to the Romans, where he spends a lot of time on Romans 11, chapter 11.
Yeah.
Spends a lot of time on his desire to win the Jewish people back, God's chosen people back, and to understand the Trinity. And, I once tried, I mentioned to your producer there, I was in Cleveland, and I talked to a gentleman who worked for the government in Israel, in Haifa, and I believe he came to Cleveland for a trade to represent the Jewish government in trade and, try to foster trade with Ohio businesses. And I mentioned to him, I've just kind of early evangelization as a young man. Now I'm almost, I'm 70 already. And I remember this where I said, I thought of that, the Apostle Paul talking about in Romans. And I said, did you ever hear of Saul of Tarsus? And he looked at me, and he just looked at me and said, have you ever heard of in your country, Benedict Arnold, the general that turned against
Oh,
George
man.
Washington, and I was shocked. But
Bill,
that
I'm sorry, but we're going to have to leave it there because it was it was a good story, but we didn't get to a question. So call back if you want to talk to Joe. He's here pretty much every Wednesday now. Joe Heschmeyer, God bless you. Thank you for 2 great hours. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me on.
Check it out, A Shameless Show. You can find his podcast there. We'll do it again tomorrow right here, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.